They came in the night, not with declarations of war but with chains. On a small frontier colony where children laughed under alien skies, slaver vessels descended like carrion birds. The raiders were practiced, efficient, merciless. They did not see young lives as sacred, only as commodities to be broken and sold. When their holds were full, they left nothing behind but silence and ash. The few who survived the massacre found no comfort in their survival, only the knowledge that those most vulnerable had been dragged into darkness. News traveled fast. Out there in the void, tragedies often faded into the background of interstellar politics, one species' misfortune becoming another's indifference. But this was different. These were human children. Humanity, still carving its place among the stars, understood grief in ways older civilizations had long numbed themselves against. Every lost life carried the weight of memory, lineage, and hope. When the recordings of burned classrooms and abandoned toys reached Earth, a sorrowful fury spread like wildfire. The names of the dead were read aloud in homes, schools, and churches. A wound had been cut into the heart of a people, and it demanded an answer. Across the galactic stage, the expected answer was negotiation. The Interstellar Council urged restraint, advising humanity to appeal through sanctioned courts, to prove its civility by filing petitions. To the slaver guilds, such words were a reassurance that they would face no consequence stronger than fines or sanctions they had long ago learned to ignore. To them, humans were simply another young species, another source of flesh, destined to complain, while their offspring were traded in distant markets. The guilds had seen this cycle many times before, and they believed it would be no different now. They were wrong. America, bearing the weight of its colonies and the fury of its citizens, did not bow to procedure. The speeches given were brief, the announcements cold, but every word struck like a hammer. Those who harmed human children would know no safety. This was not diplomacy. It was a sentence. The order was not written into treaties, nor did it appear on official channels, but the silence in its place carried more menace than any declaration of war. Humanity had no need for ceremony. Its grief had crystallized into something sharper. Among the colonies, whispers began to circulate of an answer unlike anything the stars had seen before. Stories spread faster than confirmation, shaping themselves into legend. Some spoke of a lone figure trained beyond comprehension, a shadow that moved between worlds. Others described entire teams, faceless operatives whose existence would never be recorded, tasked with one purpose alone. The name they gave it was simple, brutal, and unforgettable: the Gravekeeper. No one claimed responsibility for coining the term, but once spoken, it took root in every tongue. The suggestion was clear: for every child taken, for every grave dug in human soil, there would be another grave prepared, but not for the innocent. The galaxy watched with unease. Humanity had long been underestimated, seen as fragile, soft, easily cowed by the scale of interstellar power. Yet the faces of weeping parents and the testimonies of surviving children revealed something older than technology, older than diplomacy. They revealed a species bound together by a primal truth: the protection of the young is sacred. That truth outweighed fear, outweighed calculation, outweighed the delicate balance of alien politics. Other civilizations could not grasp the depth of that rage, because they had forgotten it. For humans it burned anew. The first retaliation was not announced. There were no parades of fleets, no banners raised in vengeance. Instead, the slavers' ships simply began to vanish. A raiding vessel en route to another human colony was found days later, adrift and gutted, its crew unrecognizable, its cargo hold empty. No one claimed credit, yet everyone knew. The story was repeated in dozens of ports, details distorted by rumor, until one thread bound them all together: a faceless figure who came in silence and left only ruin for those who preyed upon children. By the time the slaver guilds recognized the danger, it was already too late. They had thought themselves untouchable, but they had awakened something they could neither bribe nor intimidate. What descended upon them was not an army seeking victory. It was something far simpler, far older, a reckoning born from grief and sharpened into vengeance. For every child buried, another spade struck soil. The Gravekeeper was awake. They called him a demon because there was no other word strong enough. His existence was never officially confirmed, no uniform bore his insignia, no record carried his name. Yet in every whispered account, in every fearful retelling, one truth remained: the Gravekeeper was real. He was the weapon forged in silence when grief turned to fury, a living answer to those who believed humanity could be broken without consequence. He was not a soldier in the conventional sense. Soldiers fight battles in daylight, bound by rules of engagement, seen and counted among the living. The Gravekeeper was none of these. He moved in the gaps where laws dissolved, a shadow shaped not for defense but for punishment. To the outside eye, he seemed less like a man than an instrument, a creation designed for one purpose only. His war was not fought for territory or glory. It was fought for graves left too small, and for voices silenced before they had the chance to grow. The choice of his title was no accident. A soldier defends borders, a commander raises armies, but a Gravekeeper tends to the dead. He was the guardian of what had been taken from humanity, and his duty was to ensure that every child lost was not forgotten but avenged. When the slavers dug their shallow pits with greed, he filled them with the bones of their own cruelty. It was not justice in the legal sense, nor vengeance in the emotional sense. It was colder, sharper, closer to inevitability. Accounts of his methods were fragmented, often second-hand, yet consistent in their terror. A slaver base that had operated with impunity for decades would suddenly fall silent, communications severed, escorts gone. Weeks later, scavengers might stumble across the remains, halls darkened, walls scorched, leaders dead where they had once feasted. The details varied, but one fact repeated itself without fail: no human child was ever found among the wreckage. They were either freed or already mourned. The Gravekeeper did not confuse vengeance with cruelty. His wrath was precise, striking only those who had chosen to stain their hands with innocence. For the alien guilds, this precision was more terrifying than indiscriminate destruction. An enemy who destroys everything can be predicted, even endured. But an enemy who strikes only at the guilty strips away all illusions of safety. It meant there was no refuge, no contract, no distant outpost too small or too hidden. Every slave master who once believed themselves beyond consequence now carried the same dread, that somewhere in the void, a faceless hunter had marked their name. Rumors spread like infection. In the cantinas of frontier stations, smugglers lowered their voices when the Gravekeeper's name was spoken. Ship captains who had once trafficked freely in children refused such cargo now, not out of morality but out of fear. The most hardened killers swore they had seen his shadow in the corner of their vision, a flicker that vanished before they could aim a weapon. Fear made him larger than life, and legend carried him further than any official declaration ever could. The galaxy had seen assassins, mercenaries, and secret operatives before. But this was different. This was not the hired blade of a corrupt noble, or the black market enforcer of some syndicate. This was a state-sanctioned phantom, unleashed not for profit but for principle. That distinction unsettled entire civilizations. If humans could summon such a figure for their children, what would they summon for themselves? Even those who dismissed the stories as propaganda could not ignore the pattern. The slaver raids dwindled, entire guild networks collapsed under the weight of sabotage and assassination. Markets that had once traded openly in stolen lives found themselves starved of supply. The Gravekeeper had struck not only with violence but with strategy. He was not simply killing raiders, he was dismantling the very machinery that made their trade possible. To the victims who had endured generations of slavery under alien hands, his legend became something else. They began to whisper his name not with fear but with reverence. Humanity's demon had become their protector, their avenger, the hand that punished those the galaxy refused to confront. They saw in him not a monster, but proof that one species still carried enough fire to fight back when the powerful preyed upon the weak. Through all of this, the Gravekeeper himself remained unseen. No photograph was ever captured, no voice ever confirmed. He was less a man than a message written in blood and silence: harm our children, and you will not endure. That message spread faster than fleets, faster than edicts, until even those who had never met a human understood the warning. A single figure, faceless and nameless, had altered the balance of power through nothing more than relentless will. And in the stillness between strikes, when the galaxy held its breath, one truth echoed louder than the rest: humanity had created its own demon, not out of hatred, but out of love for what had been lost. And the demon would not sleep until the graves were full. The strikes did not come as random bursts of violence. They came as a campaign, deliberate and methodical, crafted with the precision of someone who understood that terror was most effective when paired with inevitability. Each move built upon the last, until the slaver guilds realized they were not fighting a man but the unfolding of a design meant to end them entirely. The Gravekeeper did not attack the strongest first. He struck at the connective tissue, the nodes of supply and transit that made the slave trade sustainable. Outposts where fuel was stockpiled mysteriously burned, data caches holding records of transactions disappeared, communication relays went silent overnight. The effect was devastating. For the first time in generations, the vast web of slaver operations felt strain. Ships that once sailed freely between markets found their routes broken, their reliability uncertain. Buyers began to grow impatient, questioning whether the guilds still had control. Then came the rescues. Entire convoys meant to deliver hundreds of captives to auction houses never arrived. Months later, those captives would reappear, not as slaves but as witnesses, testifying about what had been done to them. Their testimony was not given in courtrooms or official hearings, but broadcast across civilian networks. Humanity did not simply free its children and allies. It made sure every corner of the galaxy saw the scars of what had been inflicted and knew who had caused them. Shame and exposure became weapons as sharp as any blade. The guilds tried to answer with force. They gathered fleets, hired mercenaries, and set traps across suspected routes. None of it worked. The Gravekeeper refused to fight on their terms. He did not meet fleets in open battle. He dismantled them piecemeal, cutting fuel lines, poisoning food supplies, sending false coordinates that scattered them into ambushes of their own making. Ships returned to base only to find the docks mined, the command centers burning, the leadership already gone. The lesson was repeated over and over. They could not predict him, and they could not protect themselves. What unsettled them most was his restraint. He did not attack neutral ports, he did not strike colonies uninvolved in the trade. His war was clean, focused, and merciless only to those who had chosen the life of a slaver. This precision carried its own psychological weight. The guild leaders realized he knew exactly who they were, where they operated, and how they profited. He had information no outsider should possess, and he wielded it without waste. It meant nowhere was safe, not their homes, not their pleasure worlds, not their hidden accounts. They were not fighting chance. They were fighting inevitability. The more he struck, the more their allies abandoned them. Civilizations once complicit and looking the other way began to calculate the cost of remaining tied to a doomed enterprise. Trade partners severed contracts. Dockmasters refused passage. Mercenaries who had taken slaver coin found themselves hunted, their pay never worth the dread of becoming another corpse in the legend. Isolation set in, not through diplomacy, but through fear of being associated with the Gravekeeper's chosen prey. Across the stars, populations long subjugated by the guilds began to rise. Freed captives spread word of the faceless figure who destroyed their masters, and rebellion followed. Slave camps erupted in violence, guards murdered in their sleep by those they once whipped. It was not humanity alone tearing down the trade. The Gravekeeper's campaign gave others the courage to act. His war was a spark that lit fires across countless worlds, and the guilds no longer faced a single enemy, but a tide of resistance they could not suppress. Alien governments condemned humanity, labeling its actions barbaric, uncivilized, proof that mankind had no place in the delicate order of interstellar society. Yet their condemnation rang hollow, for their own citizens whispered approval. In crowded markets, in hidden taverns, in homes where families feared their children might one day vanish, the Gravekeeper was not a demon but a savior. Humanity's vengeance had spoken the words no council dared: the lives of children are not commodities, and those who act otherwise will be buried. The guilds tried to outlast him, believing the campaign would exhaust itself, that the faceless hunter would eventually make a mistake. But the campaign did not falter. Each raid, each sabotage, each assassination built into the next with relentless rhythm. The more they resisted, the more they lost, and the more the legend grew. The Gravekeeper was not measured in victories or territory but in the collapsing empire of those who had thought themselves untouchable. By the time the third year of strikes began, entire sectors of the slaver trade had gone dark. Guild leaders who once commanded fleets now traveled with dread, their entourages smaller with every passing month. They no longer spoke of profit, they spoke of survival. And in the shadows of their fear, the message was clear: humanity had not sent a soldier, or an army, or a fleet. It had sent the Gravekeeper, and he would not stop until their graves were dug. The slaver guilds had grown rich on arrogance, convinced their networks were too vast to fall, their leaders too powerful to touch. But as their fleets burned and their markets crumbled, fear pushed them into desperation. They gathered in fortified citadels, lords of flesh who once boasted of wealth now whispering about survival. They tried to forge unity, pooling resources and promising each other protection, but distrust rotted their alliance. Every meeting was shadowed by suspicion, for each knew the Gravekeeper had already killed their rivals. If he could strike at one, he could strike at all. The Gravekeeper did not give them time to build confidence. His campaign shifted from dismantling their supply lines to striking at their hierarchy. No longer content to cripple the infrastructure, he cut directly at the heads of the trade. Guild masters who had once ruled with impunity were found dead in their palaces, their bodies left as warnings. Some were killed in flight, their ships never arriving at the safe ports they had fled toward. Others simply vanished, their names scrubbed from guild records as if they had never existed. Each death carried a message. Leadership offered no shield. For the surviving lords, paranoia became unbearable. They surrounded themselves with guards, tested their food, and sealed their chambers behind layers of defense. Yet no precaution mattered. The Gravekeeper's strikes were not reckless assaults. They were executions, carried out with surgical finality. Each time a lord fell, the survivors grew more fractured. Some attempted to surrender quietly, abandoning their positions and seeking asylum under alien governments. But wherever they hid, the same fate awaited them. Protection purchased with gold could not outlast the reach of a promise born from grief. The guilds tried to counterattack. They pooled fleets into massive armadas, daring the faceless hunter to face them openly. The fleets found nothing. When they returned, it was to smoldering ports and dead leaders. Their strength, gathered in pride, was rendered meaningless because the Gravekeeper refused to meet them where they were strong. He fought a war of precision, striking only where it mattered, cutting away the foundation until their fleets were little more than stranded husks without command. The death of the High Syndic marked the beginning of the end. He had been the voice of the guilds, the figure who convinced lesser slavers that the trade would endure no matter what humanity sent against them. His assassination, carried out without witnesses, broke the illusion of control. The syndicate shattered, its lesser factions turning on one another in hopes of securing power before their own inevitable end. What followed was collapse from within, accelerated by the knowledge that the Gravekeeper was still watching, still hunting, still striking. Those who had once mocked humanity now cursed its relentlessness. In their final moments, slaver lords demanded to know why they had been singled out for such destruction, when countless other species had practiced the same cruelty. They never understood the answer. Humanity's vengeance was not measured against history or compared to other sins. It was personal. It was the graves of their own children that had summoned the Gravekeeper, and that summons could not be ignored. The last surviving lord begged for mercy. Surrounded by guards, buried behind defenses built at obscene cost, he believed wealth might still buy him one more chance. But the Gravekeeper was not moved by wealth, or by words, or by fear disguised as apology. He was the custodian of graves dug too early, and his duty was not negotiable. The end came swiftly, leaving no legacy behind. The slaver's name, once feared, was reduced to ash and rumor. Across the galaxy, the collapse of the guilds was undeniable. Trade networks that had spanned centuries disintegrated in months. Worlds that had been stripped for labor declared themselves free. The markets that once thrived on human children and countless others lay abandoned. The guild halls that had echoed with cruelty were silent now, filled only with the ghosts of their masters. The Gravekeeper had done what no coalition, no fleet, no council had ever dared. He erased the slaver lords from power entirely. In the aftermath, the galaxy was forced to confront a reality it had long ignored. Humanity had proven that it did not need to be the strongest species, nor the most advanced, to reshape the balance of power. It needed only conviction, sharpened into a weapon that refused compromise. And in doing so, it left behind a warning deeper than any treaty: the protection of human children was not negotiable. To cross that line was to invite the Gravekeeper, and no empire, no lord, no wealth could survive his reckoning. When the war ended, there were no parades, no speeches declaring victory. The Gravekeeper vanished as silently as he had appeared, leaving behind only ruins and memories. Humanity did not announce his return, nor did it seek recognition for what had been accomplished. The silence itself was deliberate, for his existence had never been about glory. He was a weapon forged for a single purpose, and once that purpose was fulfilled, he faded into legend. The colonies rebuilt with quiet determination. Families honored their dead not with vengeance but with remembrance, erecting monuments inscribed with the names of children whose lives had been stolen. Those names were spoken not as symbols of tragedy but as proof that their memory had summoned justice. Each stone carved into the earth stood as a promise: never again would humanity allow the young to be carried away without consequence. Where the slavers had tried to erase futures, humanity planted roots deeper and stronger. Across alien space, whispers continued. The Gravekeeper had become more than a man, more than even a weapon. He had become a myth. In distant taverns, smugglers told stories of how he could walk through walls of fire. Refugees swore he had freed them with a glance. Mercenaries claimed he could not be killed, that bullets passed through him as though he were already part of the void. The truth mattered little. What mattered was belief, and belief made him larger than any army. To countless civilizations, his name was not spoken in fear alone but also in hope, a reminder that somewhere in the stars, justice still existed. For the governments that had tolerated the trade, the legend was a complication. They sought to downplay the campaign, framing it as human savagery or unlawful vengeance. Yet their citizens whispered a different story, one in which humanity had done what no council dared: draw a line that could not be crossed. The contradiction unsettled them, for it showed that power was not always defined by fleets or treaties, but by will. And humanity's will had proven immovable. Within humanity itself, the legend carried a heavier weight. Pride ran deep, but so did unease. They had summoned something monstrous, not out of cruelty, but out of love for what had been taken. The Gravekeeper was proof that grief could become a weapon sharper than any blade, and that knowledge was both comforting and frightening. Parents looked upon their children with relief that they were safe, yet also with the haunting question of what kind of demon their species was willing to forge in their defense. It was a paradox only humanity could carry, to celebrate survival while mourning the cost of ensuring it. The galaxy adjusted in subtle ways. Slavery did not vanish entirely, but its reach was broken, its networks shattered. Worlds once resigned to oppression now found space to resist, emboldened by the memory of a faceless figure who had proven the trade was not untouchable. Laws were rewritten, not out of moral awakening, but out of fear that humanity might one day send the Gravekeeper again. Even those who despised humans spoke of them carefully, with a note of respect woven into every warning. For the children of that generation, the story of the Gravekeeper became a rite of passage. Teachers spoke of him as both a lesson and a warning. Some described him as a protector who had shown the galaxy that innocence was sacred. Others portrayed him as a shadow born from pain, proof that even a noble cause could create something terrifying. Each interpretation carried truth, but none diminished the fact that his existence had altered the course of history. Humanity's reputation was forever changed. In the end, the Gravekeeper was not remembered by his face, for he had none. He was remembered by the silence he left in his wake, by the graves that no longer filled with children, by the guilds that no longer dared speak their trade aloud. His true power was not in the destruction he wrought but in the certainty he left behind, that those who preyed upon the innocent would never rest easily again. Humanity was still small compared to the empires that stretched across the stars. It was still young, still vulnerable in many ways. Yet the Gravekeeper had proven that size and age mattered less than conviction. The galaxy had learned that while humans might bend, they would not break, and when pushed past grief into rage, they would rise with a fury no civilization could endure. That truth lingered long after his shadow disappeared, etched into memory deeper than any monument. The Gravekeeper's war had ended, but his legend endured. To humanity, he was both curse and guardian, a reminder of what love could forge when tested by cruelty. To the galaxy, he was a warning carved in silence. And though his work was finished, the graves he had filled remained as markers of a promise. Humanity may forgive many things, but never the theft of its children.